amazing!
Good day, you are welcome to today's lesson. In this lesson, we'll be talking about CSS Basics. In this lesson, we'll be talking about CSS Basics. I am Asante Patrick Romoto, and I will be your facilitator for this lesson. What are some of the things that we'll be talking about in this lesson? In this lesson, we'll be getting to know what CSS is. We'll get to know what do we mean by cascade in CSS. Then we'll take it on from there. This is one of the long lessons that we'll be having, and it is important we have so. That one being said, let's begin. We have actually dealt with CSS. We have applied certain styles to our document in our previous videos. This video seems to serve the basics and a better understanding of whatever we did in our previous videos. So you ask yourself, what is CSS? CSS basically means cascading style sheet. CSS basically means cascading style sheet. What is the use of this? CSS is basically for styling your HTML document, giving it colors, inserting images, changing background colors, changing font size, changing font style, and other stuff. So if you want real design to your website, CSS is the tool that you use. CSS is the tool that you use. And as I said earlier on, there is a basic introduction to some of the stuff that CSS contains. So let's continue. What do we mean by cascading? What do we mean by cascading or cascade? Cascade is just a verb and it means to fall. It's normally used to represent waterfall. So if you see how waterfall falls, how waterfall falls or behaves, that's basically the meaning of cascade. So in CSS, what do we mean by cascading? You say cascade means styles can fall. They can fall or cascade. They can fall or cascade from one style to another, enabling multiple style sheets to be used on one HTML document. What does this mean? In our previous videos, we did talk about the 3 basic style sheets available to HTML documents when viewed inside of our web browser. We talked about the user agent style sheet. We talked about the user itself, the user of the site or the client or whatsoever be it. The user has his or her own style that he can apply to the website that he or she is viewing. Then we have the developer style, and the developer style is where we have CSS, and that's where the developer would be able to apply certain changes to the website outlook. You get it? Okay, so CSS is basically a tool that web designers use. So if you're a web designer, this is your field, and it is important that you take it very serious. You understand this step very well for your own good. Now that we know the meaning of CSS, so we know cascading. CSS means cascading style sheet. Cascading style sheet. We understand cascading now. What is style? Style is basically from the word maybe font style or something of that sort. Something of that sort. You understand? So when you hear style, it means how exactly does the thing look? The sheet is just a paper or a page that contains whatever that you've written. You get it? So that's basically the meaning of CSS. The basics or the meaning of CSS. That's the basic understanding that you should have as a student. Okay, for now, when we dive in, when we go in deeper, you understand better. You understand better when we go in deeper. Then our next thing that we will talk about is CSS Ruleset. CSS Ruleset. Okay, Ruleset. Let me combine it. What is this CSS Ruleset that we are talking about? What is this CSS Ruleset? Okay, so we know the meaning of CSS. Then Ruleset. Ruleset is sometimes also referred to as rule. So you can call it rule or Ruleset, but the technical term is Ruleset. So you go by Ruleset. Okay. Now, rule is just a formula or something that you need to follow in order to get something done and done well. You get it? So when you come to tech world, the technical language that we use here, you can call it syntax. So rule set can also be called syntax. So we can say it is CSS rule set or CSS syntax. This is the rule or formula or however you would term it that you need to follow in order to be able to apply CSS to your to your HTML document, in order for you to be able to style your HTML document as you may want it. You get it? So what is this syntax that we are supposed to follow? Let's take it a bit further and see if you would understand something better. So in our previous videos, let me come here. In our previous videos, you see that we normally style our h1 element. So let's say I have my h1 element, then I'll have my opening curly braces, and I'll have maybe color, then I will set it to red, then I will close it. This, whatever that we are having here, starting from h1 to the last curly braces, is what we call the rule set. The h1 is called the selector. These are some terms that you are supposed to know. The selector. This is called a declaration. Then, so that's basically what a rule set contains. It contains a selector, a declaration, an opening curly braces, and a closing curly braces. And if you will have to set more than one property to an element, then you have to separate it with a semicolon, as I have here. But I always end my my property and value with a semicolon to prevent any mishandling or misunderstanding of whatsoever I've written. So let's take this and go a bit further. When you take declaration, every declaration in CSS Ruleset has two things that you will have to know. It has what we call a property. And a value. Property and value. Okay, so what do we mean by property and what do we mean by value? Let's take it a bit further. You can see that inside of the curly braces I had color, then I have this and red. So we say the color is a property. It is a property of the text or the h1 element that we would want to change. You get it? So this is our property. And red is our value, and we are setting it to this value. Already our h1 element has a color property set to black, and we don't want the black, and we are changing that one to red. You get it? There is one thing. So we have a property and we have a value. Between the property and the value, there is a column. It is very, very important. Very, very, very important. So you have to understand this in order to be able to set get your CSS rule set and get it well for a better functionality. Please again, so you take note of this. Between a property and the value, there is a column, and after the value, you have to get your semicolon. If you are having just one row or one property and value pair, then you don't need the semicolon. But as I said earlier on, I always end my property value pair with what? A semicolon, to avoid doubt and misunderstanding of my code. You get it? So for the sake of clarity, you should use semicolon after every property and value declaration. I hope you are getting me. Thank you. So that's it. We have a property and we have value, and between these two we have what? Something we call a colon. It is very, very important. So this is what a declaration contains. This is what actually a declaration does contain. Declaration. What a declaration contains, please. So you take note of this for me. Okay, a declaration contains what? A property and a value. A property and a value, and between this property and its value we have a colon that separates them. You get it? We have a colon that separates them. It is very, very important. Okay, then we'll talk about other property and some key things that you would want to know. All text or whatever that we write have width, and the width can be set with pixels. Pixels is represented with px. So let's say this is my width. I have my column, then maybe 25 px. Okay, so that's it. 25 px. Px means pixels, pixels, and it has its own meaning. You can search on Google for the meaning of pixels and you understand better. Or you can also set it in percentages. So I can write 25 then percent. Okay, don't forget your what? Semicolon. I'm not saying you should write width as 25 pixels and also write 25% under it. No, it's either you use pixels or you use the percentage. I'm just telling you that the value can be in pixels or it can be in percentages. When we dive deeper into CSS, you will understand the uses of this, and you also know that there are other units that you can attach. Okay, between the value and each unit, there is not supposed to be any space. Hello, are you there? I am saying that between a value and each unit, there shouldn't be any white space in there. Any space in coding, we call it a white space. Okay, avoid white space in between your values and their unit. Okay, in between your values and their unit, it is very, very, very important. If you obey this simple rule, it will take you great miles. Okay, so please and please again, you take key note of this. Okay, so for instance, let's say I love H1 because I always want my heading to look prettier. Okay, so let's say I have my H1. Let me see if I can get rid of this. Okay, I have my H1, then I have my this opening what? Curly braces. Forgive me for that. Okay, opening curly braces, then I have my width. Then I have my column, then 25 what? px, then I have my semicolon, then I close it. So this constitutes what? My rule set for what? H1. This constitutes my rule set for H1. Let's say I want to change the color and the weight of H1 at the same time. What do I do? How do I do it? So I have H1, then I have my opening curly braces. Let's say I have color, then I will set this to red because I'm going to use more than one property. I will have this. In this case, my semicolon is mandatory. Okay, in this case my semicolon is mandatory. Then I will go to width, then I will set it to 25 px. Okay, I love px instead of the percentage. Then I will come here and close it. You can close it here also, it doesn't make anything. Okay, but I always love it to be at the down here. Okay, so that's it. As I said, there shouldn't be any space between the value and its unit. Okay, so for instance, we don't need something like 25, then I have my p and maybe my x of 25, then I have my px at one side. No, there shouldn't be any white space, no white space, no white space between them. Okay, it is something you should look up to. Avoid it at all costs. Avoid it at all costs. So that's the basic rule set that we would be talking about. We know what a rule set is, we know what a declaration is, we know what a property is, we know what a value is. Let's take it a bit further. Moving on, we'll be talking about CSS selectors. CSS selectors. We just talk about selector. We said our H1 element is what? A selector in CSS. In CSS, we don't call it H1 element, we call it what? A selector. So we will talk about CSS what? Selectors. CSS selectors. CSS selectors, okay? CSS selectors. Nice one. Okay. What is a CSS selector? CSS selector is either an HTML element that you would select and apply styles to it. Okay, so as we had in our previous video, in our previous lesson, I told you that H1 was what? A selector. H1 was a selector. There are different types of selectors. Because this is just the basics, we would want to have a brief introduction to them. Then when we start CSS in depth, okay, we will understand each and every type of CSS selector better. Okay, so for now, let's take the types. So we have one, the type selector, the type or element selector, An example was what we had earlier on H1. You can have P, you can have maybe EM. I hope you know what EM is used for. You can have maybe strong. Okay. In writing selectors, the difference between a selector and an element is that with element you need what? Less than, then the name of the element, then greater than. Okay, there may be, if it is not an empty element, you have to what? Close it appropriately. I hope you are getting it. The difference between this and selector is that in selector, or when we are talking about selectors, you just need the name. In this case H1. Okay, in this case H1, we don't care about opening and closing tags. You get it? So this is for what? HTML. This is for HTML, and this is for CSS. Okay, so please you take key note of this. It is very, very important. If you just grab this simple rule, it will take you miles. Okay, it will take you great heights. Okay, so please just understand for me. So we are saying that the first type of selector is what? A type selector or the element selector. I hope it is clear. That's great. Then the next type of selector, we call it the Jack, where are you? Okay, so we call it the ID selector. Please, ID selector. ID selector. When we are tackling HTML, when we start with HTML, we start going inside HTML, we dive deeper, you understand what ID is used for. But for now, you will get to know, and you will bear with me, that each and every human being on earth has his or her own specific ID. So your ID is different from your parents' own, your brother's own, your siblings' own, your friends' own, your colleagues' own. So ID is specific. I want you to take this keynote. ID is specific and very unique. Okay, so each and every person or each and every species or entity has its own what? ID, and that ID is unique and specific to that person alone. So for instance, let's say I'm writing my let's go here, Jack. Let's say in my HTML document, for instance, I write my h1 element and I give it ID and I call it maybe row. Okay, give it ID, I call it row, then I close it nicely. Let me close it for the sake of understanding. Okay, I cannot come to maybe my h2 element and give it an ID with the same row. No, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. You can't give the same ID to two different things for it to be possible. No. Once I have applied row to h1, it means h1 or row is unique to h1 and only h1. It is unique to h1 and only h1. It cannot be applied elsewhere. It cannot be applied to any other element apart from h1. Okay, so please, you take key note of this. You take key note of this. So that's ID, and in applying ID, it is a very simple step. So for instance, let's say because ID is specific, whenever you are calling ID in CSS, don't forget what we just did is in what our HTML document. In calling ID in CSS, you will precede the name of the ID with what? A hash symbol. So let's say I have applied row to my h1 element, is that also calling it? I will precede it with what? A hashtag symbol, then the name of the ID, in this case row. Okay, then I will open and close my curly braces, then my declaration goes in here. Okay, my declaration goes in here. I hope by now you understand what a declaration means. You understand what a declaration means. A declaration means it continues. Okay, so this is how to select an ID. This is how to select what? An ID. This is how to select an ID. ID is specific to an element. You cannot apply the same ID to another or a different element. Okay, so once you choose an ID for an element, you stay with it. You stay with it. Then the next type of selector that we will be talking about, is class selector. Class selector. Okay, a class selector. Let me clean this and get a better line. Maybe we'll stick with this. A class selector. Okay, so with class selector, let me ask you this simple question. How many people are you in your class? Okay, in your class. If we talk about class, somebody might think the classroom or something like that. No. Even if you are in the classroom, you are there with people. If you are not in the classroom, even your class, your social class, you are there with people. You get it? So this means that when you come to the tech world and in website design and development, you can apply the same class to more than one element. To more than what? One element. This is the difference. So an ID can be applied to just an element, but class can be applied to more than one element. So for instance, let's say I would want to apply a class of, let's say I love my headings. So here I have my class, and maybe I'll call it maybe I will still use row. Okay, I'll apply row to h1. Don't forget to close it, please. So h1, then whatever I want will go in between. Is that also? That's fine. Then maybe when I come to h2, I would want to apply the same class, the same row class, the same row class, please. Then you don't forget to close this one as well. So that's my h2, closing it better. You get it? So with classes you can apply the same class to more than one element. Even if I want to apply it to my paragraph element, my strong element, my emphasis element, or whatsoever be it, I can still do this. Okay, I can still do this. Don't forget, whatever we have here is inside of what? Our HTML document. If you don't apply the class inside of your HTML document, you can't come and use it inside of your CSS. So please, you take note. You take note of this. Let me bring this guy here. Jack, come here. No, move a bit here for me. Thank you. Okay, so you have to apply it inside of your what? HTML element in order for you to be able to use it in your CSS. Okay, so we have applied classes inside of our HTML element. How do we access it? How do we access this class inside of what? Our CSS document. Okay, so let's go. Let's say I've applied class row to h1 element. I have applied the same class row to what? h2 element. You should know that h1 element is different from h2 element. Okay, in CSS, let me write for the sake of understanding. In CSS, we are now inside of our CSS file. Okay, in CSS, I will access my class with a dot, then the class name. Okay, class name, a dot and a class name. Then don't forget my declaration follows. Okay, so declaration follows here. I hope you are getting it. So in this case, I use the class row, so it is dot, then row, then I will open, then I'll close, then my declaration goes here. Okay, a dot, don't forget, let me enlarge it for you to see and see better. Let me enlarge it for you to see and see better. So you see a dot here, then the name, in this case row, then my declaration also follows. I hope you are getting it. Okay, so let's go back. That's fine. Okay, so that's what we have. So if I apply any property and makes any changes, let's say okay, let's take an example. Let's say I have dot, I have row, is that also? Okay, I have row, I open it. What is this? I open it, and let's say color, and I give it red. Someone will ask, why does this guy like red? I like red because I'm what? Okay, let's hold it there. So let's say dot row, then color, I applied red. Okay, I applied red. In this case, it means my h1 element and my h2 element, their text or their content will definitely be in the color what? Red, in the color red. Thank you. But maybe I would want my h1 element to have a special color. Even though they have the same class, I would want my h1 element have the color blue and my h2 element rather have the color red. So in that case, what do I do? So in that case, I will have to call my h1 element. Okay, so h1, then I will bring my dot, then the name of the class, then I'll give it my declaration that I want to give. Okay, my declaration goes here. Note, you call the name, that's the type selector or the element, then you add your class to it. For a better way of being able to link your declaration or whatsoever that you want to link to a particular element having the class. Okay, so if I want to apply another color or a different color to h2, even though it has the same class with h1, I will also have to call the name h2. Then I'll bring my dot, then row, then my declaration goes in here. My declaration goes in here. Please, I hope you are understanding. This is just the basics. When we start tackling it deeper, you will understand them better. Okay, so we've identified, or we've talked about type element, type or element selector. We've talked about ID selector, and we have also talked about class selector. The confusion mostly comes with class and ID. I am saying that ID is unique and is just for an element, a single element. The same ID cannot be applied to more than one element. To more than one element, it is applied to one and only one element. But class can be applied to more than a number of elements, and a chosen number that is okay for your own good. You can apply it a class to that, but an ID is specific and unique, and it can be applied to more than one element. Let's take it a bit further. We'll move on to the next type of element, a selector, and that's the, let me see, Jack, come here. I hope you are learning. I believe you are learning. Okay, so the next type of selector is what? Attribute selector. Okay, it is attribute selector. Don't worry if you don't understand attributes. But in our previous videos in the HTML elements, anatomy of HTML elements, we did talk about attributes. So please, if you don't understand, I advise you go back and watch that video for a better understanding of this topic. Okay, so let's take, for instance, Jack, where are you? Come. Okay, let's take for instance, let me change the color. Okay, so let's take for instance, I have my anchor element. Is that also? I have href, then I will give it a value, then maybe I close it. Is that also? Close it, then I'll have to give it a closing tag as well. So that's one. Is that also? But you have to know the anchor element can have more than one property, one attribute. Okay, so let's say I have another anchor element. Okay, let me clean this. 2, I have another anchor element. I have href, then is equal to, then I'll apply my value. Okay, then let me clean this. We have another anchor element we call the title. Okay, so that one will also be applied. Then I'll give it a value and close it. Then I'll come down here for the sake of space, okay, and close my anchor element. I hope you are getting it. Okay, now this is what we have. Our first part, let me move them and see. So our first one, we have a, then href, then we have this, we have its value over here. Okay, 2, we have a, we have href. Forgive me for the f, this is how I actually write it, but for the sake of understanding or clarity, that's why I wrote it like this. But what is inside me has to come out. Okay, so that's it. So href, I hope you know the meaning of href. It is hypertext reference. If you don't know, I've taught you today. Don't tell me you don't know it next time. Okay, so our hypertext reference, then we have a title. Okay, let's say I would want to select the anchor element, but in this case I want to be specific to the attribute that I'm selecting. I want to be specific to the attribute that I am selecting. Okay, so how do we do that? This, whatever we have here, let me come here, go up a bit for me. Okay, whatever we have here is in what? Our HTML. We are now going inside of what? Our CSS. So let me write in CSS. Inside of our CSS, how will we be able to access these element with their specific attribute. So let's go. In accessing it, first of all, you need the name of the element. Is that also? In this case, anchor A. Then your attribute will go inside what? A bracket or a square bracket. Okay, a square bracket. So my attribute goes here. I'm using ATTR to represent attributes, nothing more, nothing less. Okay, let me get rid of this guy. Then let's go here. Okay, so in that case, I will need the name of the element. Okay, in this case A. Then my attribute go into square bracket. ATTR represent my attribute. Okay, then my declaration comes. Okay, my declaration comes here. I hope you are understanding. You get it? So for instance, let's say I want to select the href, the hypertext reference attribute of this guy. So I have A, I have this guy, I have href, then I close it, then my declaration what follows. Is that also declaration follows? I hope it is clear. Okay, let's say I want to select the title element of this same, the title attribute, of this same element. So in that case, it is A, then isn't it title here? Okay, then my declaration will go here. It will go inside this guy. Okay, declaration. I hope you know what a declaration is. If you don't, I expect you to go back and watch the video. Okay, so please, that's it. Attribute selector. That's all on attribute selector. Let's move on to the next type of selector. We call it the pseudo. Hey Jack, let me clean these boys, they are not helping me. Okay, we call it the pseudo class selector. Okay, pseudo class selector. What do we mean by pseudo class selector? Are my science students here? Do you remember the word pseudo? Okay, the word pseudo, let me come down, change the color. Okay, the word pseudo means false. Hey, it means false. Okay, or it is not true. If something is false, it means it is not what true. So pseudo class means false class, or not true class, or untrue class. Okay, or unbelievable class, whatever that you call it. Okay, so pseudo class means what? Untrue class. What is this pseudo class we are talking about? It is a way that an HTML element will behave as if it is having a class, even though in your HTML document you didn't give it any class. You did not specify any class for it. Okay, so that's what we'll be learning, and this is very, very useful, because at least you would be able to apply certain styles to certain elements even though you didn't manually give them class when you are writing your HTML document or code. Okay, so please, you take key note of this. It is very, very important and very, very useful. Now, this pseudo class is applicable, or we can apply a style using this pseudo class when the HTML elements are in certain state. They are in what? Certain states. Okay, they are in certain state. Please and please again, I said they are in what? Certain states. Okay, for instance, let's say a user hovers over an element. Let's say our link element. This is basically in its basic form. This is what it means. Okay, a user hover the user hovers over this element. In this state, when the user's cursor is on this element, okay, it's on this element, we can set what? A class and a style to this based on the action of the user. So for instance, I can write a then dot hover, then apply a style. My declaration goes here. Don't forget, my declaration goes here. Okay, so this is how it is actually done. So let's take the syntax of what? A pseudo class element. The syntax just actually means how the thing is written and how we go about it. Okay, so you have to get the name of the element. In this case, we are using our anchor element. Then you will specify the state. In this case, the user hovers over it. Okay, between the name of the element and the state of the element, you will have a colon. You have what? A colon. Then your declaration goes. Okay, your declaration goes. Please and please again, people are paying huge sum of money just to understand these things. You are getting them for free, and it is therefore imperative that you keep them at your fingertips. You will be needing them a lot. Another state that an element can assume is when a user mounces over that element. So for instance, let's say my h1 element, if a user mounts over it, I'll have to write h1 then mounts over. These words are in themselves self-explanatory. Mounts over. I wouldn't explain it. If you don't understand, then please, you have to consult or comment below or message at me privately. Okay, then your declaration comes. Please and please again. Okay, so you see that between h1, let me enlarge this so that you will see it all. I don't want a situation whereby you will come and tell me what you thought. No, I didn't see what you wrote well. Okay, so you can see between h1 and mounts over. There is what? A colon. Sorry, forgive me for that. Okay, there is a colon between the name of the element and the state in which the element is in. Okay, or the element has assumed. So this is just some of the basics of HTML. No, selectors that we would be talking about. Just a few of them, a handful of them is what we have talked about here. A handful of them is what we have talked about here. So we have gotten to know what a type or element selector, an ID selector, a class selector, an attribute selector, a pseudo class selector, and so on and so forth. Thank you. So in our next topic, I would like to talk briefly about font. Okay, font. The word font, I don't know where it comes from, but it have various dimensions or various rooms it can actually occupy. So we have font size, we have font style, and font a whole lot. When we dive deeper in CSS, when we start the VIP class for CSS, you will understand these things better. But I want to stress on font. Jack, why you come here? Okay, I would like to stress on font family. Okay, font family, and font size, Okay, the font family. Let me start from there. The font family is where you actually choose the font of your text or whatsoever that you would want to apply. So what are some of the fonts that we have? We have Arial Black, we have sans serif. These fonts belong to a particular family, and you have to know the families that they belong to. So in writing or in stating font or font family, you have to first write down the name of the family that font belongs to. Okay, you have to write the name of the family that font belongs to. You get it? Then you specify the font afterwards. You specify the font. Don't worry, when we take an example, when we deal with it in our text editors, you understand it better. But in writing your CSS, you have to apply more than one font in that family. So for instance, assuming, I'm not saying it is so, I hope you understand the word assuming. Assuming Arial Black and sans serif are in the same font family. If I really want to apply Arial Black to my text, okay, I've chosen Arial Black, that's fine. I choosing Arial Black, I will also add what? Sans serif as another what option. You get it? Some web browsers do support certain fonts and some don't also support certain font. So you wouldn't know which browser support which what font and which browser doesn't support which font. So you have to be very careful. You have to state all the fonts. At least if you give it 3 or 4 fonts inside of that font family that you have stated, it will be good for you. It will be good for you because in accordance to how you have specified the values for the font family, the browser will choose accordingly. So for instance, let's say I'm using Chrome. Chrome support Arial Black. It doesn't support sans serif. So in that case, it will choose what? Arial Black. Let's say I go to Internet Explorer or Safari. Safari does not, I'm not saying it doesn't. We are assuming, it is an assumption that we are making here. Safari, let's say, doesn't support Arial Black, but it supports sans serif. In that case, it will go in forward sans serif. Okay, so please and please again take note of this. Then let me have a bit of what stressing on my font size. My font size man. Okay, let me have a bit of stressing on that. So font, let me clean this guy. Font size, okay, font size and width have something in common. The common thing that they have between them, please, you should specify, you should note how I'm writing them. It is font then hyphen size. Okay, you don't write them together. You don't write font size, or you don't write font white space size, or you don't write font, let me get rid of this font, there may be underscore size. These are not allowed. Where is it? These, let me bring this down here. They are not allowed, please. They are not allowed. It is, let me come down here again. Right, it is font. Okay, it is not the best. That also, yes, I know you said that. Font, then maybe size. Font size. Let me see if I can clean this guy, then we'll have a better one. Font size. Okay, so that's fine. Font size. Okay, I hope you are enjoying it. Font size. Okay, so font size will have a value in either pixels. Okay, so font size, I like 25. So it can be 25 pixels or 25 100%. I'm not saying your number should be strictly 25. You can have any number at all. You can have 100 pixels, you can have 100%, you can have 200%, whatsoever be it. Please, you take key note of that. So that's basically what I would want to talk about font size in this lesson. This brings us to the end of this lesson, and it is just indeed the basis of what? CSS. It is just indeed the basics of CSS. We will be having the practicals of this later on in our test editors. For now, stay blessed and stay tuned. Bye bye. Don't you forget, keep learning, because if you learn, nobody can deceive you. You have the upper hand in every situation that you might find yourself. Thank you. Keep the fire burning. Rose Consort, we say design. Yes,